Hi, I'm David, and today I'd like to give you something to think about. Today, my meditation comes from Daniel, the 3rd chapter. By this time in history, we find that both Israel and the nation Judah have been conquered and their royal families have been carried off into captivity. It's approximately 597 BC. And Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army has come down to Judah, and they've conquered Judah. They've carried out all the royal family, including all the princes. These princes were the relatives of King David, the folks of David's lineage. Among them were 4 young men that the book of Daniel speaks about at some length. First of all, there was Daniel, who wrote this book and seems to be the main character through this book. But also there are 3 other Jewish lads. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but actually that's not really their real names. Their real names in the Hebrew language was Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You see, whenever they arrived in Babylon, the Babylonians felt like it would be better if they would forget their roots, if they forgot the fact that they were God's people, Israel, if they would forget their culture, if they would forget their identities, and if they would forget their religion. And so in an effort to do this, they changed their names to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel's name, incidentally, in Babylonian was Belteshazzar. And so this was part of a process that King Nebuchadnezzar was using to try to brainwash these young men who possibly could have been teenagers into beginning to think the way the Babylonians wanted them to think. And of course, to forget their God, the one true God, Yahweh. Well, in due time, when we get to chapter 3, we're told in verse 1, "Now Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon." Now this image which Nebuchadnezzar set up was literally a monument to himself. He was full of himself, to say the least. It was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and it was made of gold. Now, on the surface, we might think, well, this is just a king trying to leave behind a memory of himself whenever he passes, but there was more to it than that. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be recognized as a god, and it wasn't very long before a decree went out in all the land of Babylon that at an appointed time, whenever a band would play a specific tune, that everyone was to worship the image of Nebuchadnezzar, this great golden image. Well, this was a problem for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They understood who the one true God really was, and it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar. And so there was no way they were going to worship Nebuchadnezzar. And so whenever this band plays this particular song and all the rest of the residents of Babylon are worshiping Nebuchadnezzar's image, these 3 young Hebrew lads, they refuse to worship. Well, word gets around. Some of the Babylonians notice that they're not worshiping Nebuchadnezzar's image, and so they report him to Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar calls them in, and he reads them the riot act. He tells them this in verse 15 of chapter 3. "Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" Nebuchadnezzar gets right to the point. He says, "Hey, look, either you're going to worship my golden image, or I'm going to cast you into a fiery furnace. And then he takes a shot at the Hebrew God, the one true God, Yahweh. He says, and who is the God who can deliver you from my hands? Now, Nebuchadnezzar probably thought that was a rhetorical question, but it was not. The best part of this story is not the deliverance that God gives them, but it's what these three young men who are so far from home and have given up so much, they're no longer princes, but instead now they're servants. How they respond to Nebuchadnezzar is priceless, and I want to share it with you in verses 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king and said to him, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. For if that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. What they say is so important because it's not just a confession of their faith in the God, the one true God, Yahweh, but rather instead it is a conviction which has become a conviction. See, a confession is something that you will live your life because of. A conviction, on the other hand, is something that you will surrender your life to. These three young men make it very clear that whether or not God chooses to deliver them from the fiery furnace, he is still their God, and they will only worship him. Most of us know how the story ends. They are cast in the fiery furnace, but God saves them. And as a result, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, gives glory to the one true living God and sends out another decree that anyone that speaks amiss of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is going to be killed and their house is going to be burned. Where are you at in your faith in the one true God? Do you merely confess him? Or do you have a conviction? A conviction always trumps a confession. I'm David, and there's something for you to think about today.